Good afternoon, Christo.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. And we've had this conversation about you coming to chat on a podcast from some time ago, and you're a very busy man and recently retired. And so here we are. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very, very much. And please go ahead, introduce yourself, Christo. Tell
For
us.
the few that don't know.
Yes.
So I'm Christo van der Rheede, born and bred on a missionary station nearby Piketberg called Goedverwacht. And you'll recall that a few years after the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck, some of the German missionaries came to South Africa. And one of them came to stay in Genadendal, where he converted the first Khoi person. And then he left, and then he returned, and after 50 years he discovered this lady still reading the Bible that was given to her. And the church was then built in Genadendal, and the Moravian community started. Now the Moravian religion goes back to the time of Luther. In the 1500s, when he sort of diverted from the Roman Catholic Church and he created the Protestant Church. Yes. So the Moravian Church, the Lutheran Church are sort of, very closely attached.
And that's no Moravia, that's there between Piketberg and...
Yeah, but that's just the station's name. Yeah. Okay. So a number of these Moravian stations, missionary stations exist. Genadendal was the first, and then there was Helm 200 years ago, and then others such as Goedverwacht, Mammery, also Wuppertal. You can derive from the names that it has very biblical and a very German sort of background, so to speak. Yes, those missionary stations play a vital role in the upbringing of people, a very high level of education, a very, very value-based, and that has directed my entire being for the past 60 years, so to speak.
Wow. So, on your shortened CV we found on the internet, it says that you used to be a teacher.
Yes, I studied teaching and was quite privileged because the Moravians has a very long tradition in music. So organ playing, brass playing, singing, those are all the things that I did. And then I pursued a career in music. And one of the things that I dreamt of was to become a concert pianist.
Wow.
But at college, we were trained in classical music, classical singing, and then I started teaching way back in 1986. It was also very turbulent years preceding that, because 1985 it was P.V. Botha's Rubicon speech, which very little actually very little come of it, because all the expectations that we had were sort of dashed. And then the whole country erupted again, lots of conflict between people. But I started teaching, and I spent almost 20 years in teaching, being a school teacher, and then a what they call head of a department, and then a vice principal, and eventually a school principal. And then government decided to introduce outcomes-based education. Now, for me, education is very, very important. And because that made me the person that I am today. And with outcome-based education, I think they lost it at that stage, because it wasn't really premised on sound educational principles. It's more sort of on the outcomes. And then it becomes a political issue, not a real educational issue. And for me, a kid must learn, he must do the 3 R's, arithmetic, reading, and writing. Those are the key fundamentals if you want to really create the type of adult that we need to have, especially adult that is ready for the workplace. Yeah, and after 20 years, I decided to continue my studies at the University of Western Cape, the University of Stellenbosch, and eventually ended up in the private sector. joined Naspers. I had a trust there, and I became the CEO of the trust. And then from there, I went to join the Afrikaans Handelsinstituut, HI. And then I was sort of headhunted to become the CEO of AgriSA. Spent another 8 years at AgriSA in the agriculture space, very, very exciting space. In the policy space, often, had very intimate interaction with government, with the cabinet ministers and so forth. Then I retired at the age of 60. And today I am involved in quite a number of things. I'm at the F.W. de Klerk Foundation. I'm also on various boards, the Cape Symphony Orchestra, or the Philharmonic Orchestra. I'm with the KAK&K Fees.
Okay.
Also serving on Casidra's board, also Articafia. Yeah, and, using my time to support good things, because we need good institutions to take South Africa forward. Too many of our institutions have become corrupt, have imploded due to bad management. And it's important that we have good institutions that have impact-driven programs to change the lives of people for the better.
So when you were growing up outside Piketberg, I grew up in Mariesburg.
My magis.
Yeah. And where you are today and the things you've seen, would you've ever thought that would have happened?
My father was the school teacher. I can remember how the inspectors, that time we called the inspectors, and they would come to the school. They would come and fetch our books and go and show it to other schools. That was the quality of education, because they believed that...
and it was a big thing.
Inspecteer
is a groot story.
Yeah, no. My father was a nervous wreck. The whole school was a nervous wreck.
Yes.
We would sweep the classroom and suddenly pictures appeared on the walls and books need to be like it. And there was, a lot of things happening at the school. But the funny thing is, if I think back to the guy that taught us art, now, I couldn't even draw a stock maniki, But that guy was so good. When the inspector arrived at the school, the entire place would look like an art studio. The way he created it. And there wasn't electricity, so there was candles. So when I look at the Van Gogh painting or I look at the Monet painting, I have this, experience that I sort of had when I was a kid in my mind. And kids would draw beautiful stuff. When the woodwork inspector came, there were clocks made of wood, there were tables made of wood. And when the music inspector came, we all had to sing and we had to make music. And they were always very impressed with the quality of education. I mean, it was a farm school. You would look up into the roof and the bats would look at you and peep at you.
The ecology zone up there.
Absolutely. Or the scorpions would run. But they focus a lot on reading. So my father would make sure that we receive the kennis. It was a booklet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also the Kinderencyclopedia.
Yeah, that's the internet of
Precise of our generation.
I'm 42, so that was our internet.
Kennis van die wêreld. And I would read those books, Eva Venter's books, Gonzalez's books. There was a library at the school, and every day you had to bring back your books, and then you can take out a new book. That was the kind of education we received. Now, I can't understand what went wrong today, because you had to read before you could go to the next day. You had to do some maths and all of those things. But somehow, somewhere along the way, things went horribly wrong. And one of the countries that spend the most on education. But what is the return on that investment that I always ask?
For sure. And what you were saying about how ingrained education is in your, it's kind of generational. You're talking about your father and the background with the Moravian Church and all the way through all the stuff that you've done. So when you moved out of education into the private sector, what was that like for you? That must have been quite a big shift, quite a big thing.
No, indeed. Remember, if you understand the history of the Moravian South Africa, the first teachers' college, where was it established? In Genadenau. Genadenau had, if you go there, the first organ, the first printing press. Remember, Genadenau was the second biggest town after Cape Town. Stellenbosch came afterwards.
I remember that from high school history, that
Yeah.
Genadenau was a very
I'm
known place.
trying to look at the map now, and I've been there, I've driven through. Where's Genadendal again?
Close to Greyton. If you go to Greyton, Caledon, Greyton, Genadenau.
That's right.
But the sad part is, I mean, the system, political system at that stage decided, no, there's Genadendal. We have to close down this college. They closed down the college in the 1930s. And the teachers that came from that college all had to do music, all had to understand their role in terms of community upliftment. They were politically conscious. All of those things, were ingrained in those teachers that came from there. So it was a complete different breed of people that were created. And I just think, it's so sad that we have undermined the capacity of people the way we did it. Because if we created a society, open society, where people could have, even improved their capacity, the country would have benefited. Now you sit with this massive gap between rich and poor, because between those who have had the opportunity, those who don't have. And it's not sustainable for any country.
No, not at all. We are in deep trouble.
Yeah, we have to change, and we have to change very quick to make sure. And it's, and now our current government throws money after it. And the problem is not solved by throwing money after it.
Well, somebody will take the money.
No, definitely. And that is what is happening. People are cleaning up, even the sofas as well. So it's important that there must be a mentality change. Unless we change our mentalities, that's the kind of work that I'm currently embarking on. Bring communities together, white, black, colored, and or brown, listen, let's see how we solve the challenges in our town. How do we create a better town, a better future? And it's not with money. It's not with money. It's mentality. I mean, the time that I grew up, we were dirt poor. That's the irony. There weren't computers. There weren't, all the grand stuff that we have today, like electricity and stuff like that, piped water and things like that. But there was a mentality that existed to say, we are going to create the best. And I mean, today, the success of the people from Goedwag speaks for itself, because those kids are good at mathematics. They are, get employed all over the world, all over South Africa, because they've got that solid background.
Well, you see, education and your attitudes and your values are really what creates society, what define a society. And if what you're talking about, that stuff starts at home. And if you can start it at home and continue it at school or in the institutions, then you're going places. But it's been broken down in so many places that you kind of, in some ways, you have to start from scratch.
I remember when we were at the IFPA conference and Frans Cronje was up on stage and he presented that graph where they tracked the pupils from, I think, 2012 to 2022. It's basically for a whole school career, the number of pupils that entered grade 1. Everybody's saying, no, we've got an 89% pass rate and all that kind of stuff. So how it digressed each year, how many kids dropped out. So in the end, only like, what was it, 20% or something?
I can't remember, but
finished?
very few. And the point is that people get pushed on, but they are not literate.
Yeah.
There are kids that...
Yeah, well, my wife was a teacher. If you can't fail a grade more than once.
No.
If you fail grade 2, you do it again, but then you have to go to grade 3.
Notice the sad thing is that we haven't really, succeeded in changing the mindset and holding people accountable. Because in many people's minds, with the idea that the educational system that we came from, was very strict and was very
authoritarian.
now we live in a democracy. And because we live in a democracy, people must, their human rights must be respected, and this must be respected, and so forth. I said, that's good and well. I don't have a problem with that. But you must balance rights with responsibilities.
Yes.
You certainly have the right to be treated with respect, but you must also make sure that your responsibilities are adhered to in equal measures, because so you see, it's my right, and with that right comes all the demands. That's how we do things in South Africa.
But not just South Africa, everywhere.
Yeah.
Everybody's too afraid somebody will be offended.
Precisely. And when I say, but hey, isn't it time to take co-responsibility for your environment, to clean up your environment and stuff like that? Or to make sure that your kid comes to school, or that you are at school. Then suddenly, as you said, now my rights are being undermined, or my rights are not being respected. Then I run to the court, or I run to this and run to that. But I think we have the best country in the world. We have a solid constitutional democracy. I think it's important that we start teaching people that any coin has two sides. Right? It's one side speaks to what the world owes you, and the other side of the coin speaks to what you owe the world. And then you'll find it cancels each other out. The world owes you absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we change the mindset of people. That's for me critically. Otherwise, we're not going to have a bright future ahead of us.
So yeah, on that bombshell, can you maybe, before we said that you do get involved with quite a few of the policymakers in our country and things like that. Is there anything that you personally are excited about when it comes to the agricultural industry?
Look, the state of our political democracy, or our political economy, remains almost on edge. And who would have thought that we would have had a change in terms of government, and even to a certain exchange in ideology? Because up to the national elections, where the ANC was in power, the ANC that dictated the ideology, the ANC that appointed whoever wanted appointed, and we've seen the impact of that on the entire country, especially on the economy. I mean, I've been saving for 40 years since the day I started teaching into a pension fund, and when I looked at the pension fund when I retired, I almost cried my eyes out. The growth, I could have perhaps rather spent that money at the spur, would have had the full tummy every evening. The growth is marginal.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that's also the thing with a lot of. My wife was a teacher at a farm school, so you would see that the poorer communities, they want their kid to be a teacher, a policeman, somebody with a government job, so that they've got a pension.
Yeah.
And like you said.
But that's the problem. We don't teach our kids to become entrepreneurs, but that's a story for a different day. Suddenly, since the advent of the government of national unity, the economy has done this. The pension funds started to do this, and we've seen tremendous growth just within a space of what we had the elections at the end of May. It's now October. How many months?
June, July, August, September, 4 months.
4 months. We've seen, and then also, I mean, the attitudes internationally changing towards South Africa. And that for me are all positive signs.
Yes, indeed.
It shows that if we come together as a nation, if we form the Springbok team, not only on the rugby field, but we also form it in the social terrain, on the economic terrain, on the political terrain, because South Africa needs each other. We've always been a country that has been dependent on each other. The fortunate thing is what people don't realize. From the beginning, we were a sort of heterogeneous country. In country where there's homogeneity, in other words, everyone looks the same, everyone talks the same language. I think those type of countries really enjoyed tremendous growth because of the unity of purpose and the unity of cultural identity that existed. Now suddenly those countries are confronted with what? With low growth rates, or not growth rates, but low labor absorption and things like that. People are becoming older, and where do the people come from who must do the dirty job, so to speak, are all from other parts of the world. The immigrants.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they struggle to really manage that, because suddenly their entire existence are now being compromised. So Africa, we have the fortunate thing that for the 300-400 years we've been, different people. But through our differences, I think we've started to realize that we are dependent on each other, we need each other. And when I was in London now recently, somebody said to me, the world is on edge with this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, between Palestine and the Israelis, and now suddenly Iran. And if something happens up there in the north, South Africa will certainly be the safest place on earth. I said, wow. Because we are sort of politically non-aligned. Nobody actually understands where South Africa stands. Because one day we go smile with the Americans, the next day we go smile with the Chinese, and then we take the Israelis to court, so we play a international political game that only us understand, But somehow we managed to, escape those landmines that exist that can actually lead to a complete implosion.
We are, as we've just said, a few months into a new political dispensation. And one of our other podcast guests actually said something very interesting, and I'd love to hear your comment on it. He said, we all knew about the old South Africa, and we had 30 years of the new South Africa. And maybe now we're in the real South Africa, where actually we have to work together. And the voter, that's what the voters have asked, that, there's no particular leader, and we've actually got to all pull together to make it work.
Yeah, and you know what? My challenge always is with sectarian interest, where people come and say, hey, if you don't take care of my interest, then we're going to collapse this government of national unity. This is not a government of national interest or personal interest. It's not a government of personal egos. It's not a government of self-enrichment. It's a government of national unity. And there's a particular framework in which it must operate. And then the framework speaks to the Constitution. It speaks to the Bill of Rights. It speaks to the fact that we need to have a professional cadre of professionals in government, so that we ensure that we deliver the best services. And we've seen, where there's real leadership, where there's real dedication, suddenly things are turning around. I mean, the police has now really stepped up their game.
Yeah. And Home Affairs.
And Home Affairs, and this and that. And in the agricultural space, there was a bit of a upset, and I couldn't understand, if the statement of intent makes it clear we need to appoint professional people. Why do you appoint people that have spent a life in social media, and made all kinds of statements on social media that led to social turbulence, that led to, division and so forth. Right, luckily now we're over that hill, and hopefully we'll see the Department of Agriculture now really comes to the fore under the guidance of John Steenhuisen to make sure that our farmers are being assisted in the ways that they should be assisted, and that they ensure that our country has access to affordable food, healthy food, and food that is available on a daily basis. Because for me, farmers are critical. If you take farmers out of the equation, then the entire value chain collapses. And we've seen how sensitive that value chain is to any disruption, whether it's in the form of biosecurity threats, if there's a foot and mouth outbreak, or if there's an avian flu outbreak, it impacts tremendously on, that specific commodity. And ultimately, it's the consumer that pays the price.
Yeah.
Yes.
If people think things are expensive now,
Yeah.
take the farmers out, and then we'll see how expensive things are.
And then if the climate change, if there's a massive drought or a massive flood, it impacts on food production and ultimately on the price of food. I've spent time now in London, I'm still crying because we pay 23 Rand for a pound.
Yeah.
So make that sum. Meal, basic meal, 25 pounds times 23. Yeah, then you look at just for yourself, easily between 500 and 600 Rand. Yeah, you can walk to the Spur and you can still pay 150
Yes.
or so,
If you're by yourself.
Yeah.
I've got 3 kids. I go to the Spur, it's 1,000 Rand.
Yeah.
Buy them a bread and put some, cheese on it and tomato. It works out cheap.
So your time with AgriSA, you must have seen a lot of things, and tell us about what you saw, what encouraged you, what you found challenging. It would be really interesting for you to have had that national vision of agriculture. Could you expand on that a bit, please?
Yeah, remember now, when I joined AgriSA, I knew everything about policy making and so forth, and how these things work, because I've got a master's degree in, policy administration, MPA, and things like that. Sadly, though, but unfortunately, I didn't have any knowledge about agriculture. So I had to walk in there and start understanding what is this agriculture all about.
And I think that's where John Steiner is in.
I was going to
Yeah.
say, maybe you can help John a bit.
And my vuurdoop, as they say in our good Afrikaans, was in 2015 when the droughts were actually devastating. And my job was to make sure that farmers get assistance. So we ran around, we made contact with various players, created a fund for the farmers. But the problem was serious. I mean, I had many phone calls from the wives of farmers that said, my husband is on the verge of, taking his own life.
Yeah.
And then you have to find ways to assist and sometimes even take money from your own pocket, the little that you have, and send it to say, listen, just keep going, don't despair. But luckily, AgriSA had a very good structure because we had provincial structures, we had farmer unions. So instead of me trying to drive now to Kuruman to go and deliver fodder there, you could get the money into one pot, then you can distribute it to various provinces. The provinces then say, right, where's the biggest need? Okay, Kuruman, let's get to somebody who can deliver some of the fodder there, and this and that and the other. So we had wonderful experience, even, little missionary stations where we delivered stuff. Communities where we delivered stuff, because it was not only commercial farmers that were affected. It was your subsistence farmers, your subsistence communities, seriously affected. So that was the big, vuurdoop for me, as I said. Yeah, we've had very close interaction with government departments and even with government, with Treasury, to say, but find ways and means to alleviate the plight of farmers at this point in time. I can remember the biggest threat was when our total harvest for maize fell from almost 13 million tons to 7 million tons. And I even had a visit from the State Security Agency to come and talk to me about, what's happening in the space, what will be the implications if there's no maize. Because remember, maize is a staple for not only humans, but also for the entire animal industry.
Animal feed, yeah.
And they were quite worried. I said, but you better make sure that we assist, farmers with various types of assistance. And there was such a lot of unnecessary politics, which for me...
There always is, isn't it?
Sometimes, absolutely devastating, because the assumption is, oh, you're a commercial farmer, you can take care of yourself. And most of the assistance that went to the small-scale subsistence farmers, I certainly don't have a problem with that. But if you lose your commercial farmer that supplies food not only South Africa but to the rest of the world, then you have serious problems.
And there's an old saying that debt and money looks the same.
No, precisely. And I mean, you look at I always say South Africa produces food on the back of debt. You need money to farm. We've seen how farmers, and a lot of farmers, when I looked at the stats, at one stage we had, 35,000 commercial farmers, and that number dropped to approximately 30,000. So bigger farmers just took over the small-scale farmers' land and they consolidated because, unfortunately, farming in today's day and age is a scale business. You cannot go smaller than a certain percentage of hectares or so forth, or certain amount of hectares. But be it as it may, I think following that, we had serious interaction with government on the expropriation bill.
Yes.
That in itself, we consulted very widely. The banks made it very clear that the total asset value of property in South Africa amounts to 4 trillion rand. Now, 4 trillion rand is thrice the size of the current South African budget, national budget. Now, imagine that kind of value is destroyed overnight.
Yeah.
The impact of that on any economy is devastating.
Especially because like we just said, a lot of that land is debted to the banks.
No, precisely. Yeah, farmers don't. And then farmers came and said, listen, what must we do now? I said, go and borrow some more money from the bank. Because this is no longer a fight, for organized agriculture. This is now the country's fight to. And then the other thing is, government purchased land at 60, 70 billion rand thus far. What is the return on that investment? Very little. The latest stats which I've seen, that many of those farms, unfortunately, that were given to communities lying idle.
Yes.
Now you compromise, and farming is a money business. You need a strong land bank to service those farmers. You need access to cheap capital. And now the counter argument is to say, but what about the small businessman and the builder and so forth? Shouldn't they also have access to? And yeah, certainly that argument stands, because if you do it for one sector, you must do it for all the economic sectors. All of them are equally important.
You're right.
The difference, however, is that you don't eat the building, you don't eat the road, you eat. You need food. That's if you lose a farmer, then you lose the entire basis of your country's existence.
A lot of the government agricultural projects, I've had to actually go and write about them, is where the beneficiaries are a group of people, and who is responsible? Because eventually the buck must stop somewhere. And sometimes when there's a whole group of people, so often you hear they either can't work together, or somebody stole all the money and ran off and left the others destitute. So the structure in many places just seemed to not work. I'm sure you have seen that as well.
Or if you've got, let's say, R1 million comes in, but there's 500 beneficiaries.
Yes.
Then
it's not going to work. Yeah.
That's also.
Look, there's, I think it's annual that the Department of Agriculture produces the CPA report on communal property associations. 90% of those CPAs are completely dysfunctional.
Yes.
There's infighting, there's no structure, leadership, as you said, abuse their authority, misuse the money. And I think government to a very large extent has realized, and they've now put a new act into power. They've they enacted the new act. That sounds better. Secondly, they tried to intervene. I was contacted yesterday by a CPA to say, come and help us. And I said, I'm more than prepared to help. But where I, have seen and interacted with CPAs, if there's not a strong leadership, if there's not people with a proper understanding of what agriculture is all about. If there's not people that understand the financing part of it, then you can do whatever you want to do, because this is a high-risk business. A business that you really need to have good planning and planners. So sitting on the board of CASIDA, there's a couple of farms that we must operate on behalf of Department of Public Works and the Western Cape Education Department and in communities. And we've said, we'll put proper people there. So on one farm, there's a highly successful dairy. The other farm, there's highly successful lucerne, harvesting, planting and harvesting taking place. Unfortunately, you sit with communities that have expected that they're going to become very wealthy. In fact, if you look at farming generally, what is the margins? About 5%, 4.5%, 5%. There's very little to really, be excited about.
That's what must be so big.
Yeah, and then the other problem is, instead of handing out the little bit of profit the farmers made, rather invest that back into the farm. Mm-hmm. And then use a little bit of that money to identify young people with an interest in the community in farming. Send them to, because the government cannot take charge of the farm forever. That farm must be given back to the communities, but you can only do it if you have people.
Yes, you have to have the right people
from the community to run it on their behalf. And you need to be very strict in terms of the structure that you put in place. Yes, they are the shareholders, but the structure or the company or the entity, that must be run on sound governance and management principles. Otherwise, it is a mess.
Do you think South African farmers should look more into, be it commercial, be it emerging farmers, they should look into diversifying more?
I have argued for quite some time when I joined AgriSA, stop talking about commercial farmers, small-scale farmers, subsistence farmers. Talk about professional farmers. Okay. Because you can be a professional farmer on 1 hectare, where you produce mushrooms, for example, in tunnels.
Yes,
or tomatoes in tunnels.
Yes.
And then you can supply either the local market or the national market. I went to a Dutch guy. He runs a very, very innovative tunnel farming with farming in tomatoes. So you've got a structure there, and then you've got a structure outside where water gets heated during the day, and that heated water runs through the tunnel to maintain a particular temperature. So he didn't spend money on huge solar panels or on. He hasn't got the electricity bill. He uses the sun in a very innovative way.
Wow.
And then secondly, he's got little blue lights which they install to catch the flies and the moths that lay eggs in tomatoes. You look at it, you see thousands of these little animals, insects, flew into it, they died. So he makes sure that these tomatoes do not get infected by these bugs, insects. And there are 3 people in those massive tunnel. And during the time when there was a shortage of tomatoes, he coined it.
Yeah.
Right? So there's very, very innovative ways. In America, I know in Detroit, where they had the big motor manufacturing companies, they've turned those big factories into food labs.
Oh, wow.
So they produce food there at a very large scale. There's not a single, they don't, let me rather rephrase. All the people that work there are scientists, this and that and that. I went to visit a farm here in Gansbaai where they produce abalone. Not in the sea, outside of the sea. It's an entire scientific operation there. And that's the way we should think about farming going into the future. Obviously, there are places in the Netherlands and in China where they have in-house, livestock farming and stuff like that. battery farming, as you say. I don't know how ethical and how healthy it is. But I mean, if you do it properly and you do it scientifically, because you produce food for the market. So I think we need to focus on being innovative, using the smart technologies to our advantage, making sure that we become less dependent on the resources of the earth, because water is limited, water availability is limited. When I went to Taiwan, on the rooftop of the hotel, I said, where do you get these fresh flowers and fresh food from? He said, let us take you there. Got up there, got the photos. It was just mind-blowing to see how they grow. And every day, they don't buy anything from the market. They produce and for their personal consumption. So it's about shifting, away from practices that are reliant on natural resources, to practices that rely on innovation and science. And there's a big difference. And yes, obviously you cannot produce 15 million tons of maize in a lab. But even on that maize field, the kind of what they call best practices that they employ, the kind of technology that they employ is just mind-blowing.
Yep.
So for smalls, let me not talk about, but for professional farmers, there's opportunity throughout the value chain. It all depends on our mindset and how do we plan. Yes, that Dutch guy showed me. It shouldn't be costing you an arm and a leg. It's just about innovative ways of. And I mean, today there's technologies. You can go onto the internet and Google.
Yeah, it's incredible.
You can go see what people are doing.
Yeah, no, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So, Christo, you told us that you are involved with the F.W. de Klerk Foundation. Tell us a bit more about that. I honestly know nothing about what they do.
And if I may add something here, and I think if you go up to any young person in the street and you mention F.W. de Klerk, they might be thinking old apartheid president.
Yeah. So obviously, when I was asked to consider the position, I said to myself, let us put F.W. de Klerk in the right perspective. The country was absolutely in turmoil.
Yes.
Right? Pre-1990. Here comes a guy that has sort of grown up in an environment where all means and ways are trying to justify apartheid. And he walked into Parliament on the 2nd of February 1990, and he made a speech that completely stunned the world.
Indeed.
We were on the verge of a complete collapse of law and order. There would have been bloodshed like we've never seen before. And suddenly this guy came in and he made that announcement, right? He says, we're shifting from a parliamentary sovereignty, a apartheid system, to a constitutional democracy. Release Mandela, unban the ANC, unban the Communist Party, unban whomever needs to be unbanned. And for the first time, people came and sit around the table and tried to negotiate a new future for South Africa. Now, I always say it's very interesting. South Africa has always been a country of negotiated settlements. You go to the time of Jan van Riebeeck, when he came here, he made a pact with the Khoi that he's not going to take their land. He's not going to destroy their way of life. He's not going to employ them. That was the first pact. Unfortunately, that pact only lasted, until the time we left, and then everything changed. Then came the second pact when Simon van der Stel was governor at the Cape, and the British invaded the Cape. And things then completely took a different turn. If you think during the time of Simon van der Stel and his brother, they were people of mixed origin. The Cape didn't know this, differentiation between white and colored. And also remember now, the Cape was ended here. Stellenbosch, the mountain. It was no anything into the.
A lot of Cape Townians still think that.
the term Afrikaner, came about as people could no longer associate with the lands
Anywhere in
of
Europe,
origin,
yeah.
right? And they called themselves Afrikaners. And the first Afrikaners were people that were sort of mixed, because remember now, you had the white farmers who referred to themselves as boere. You had the French Huguenots that called themselves, the Huguenots. You had the British settlers. So people used various names because they could still associate with those particular countries. But a complete new people started, and people started calling it. That's why the surname Afrikaner is a surname that you only find amongst colored people, right? I grew up with kids. Their surname was Afrikaner. You had Jonker Afrikaner, who was the first voortrekker. And eventually, when the British came about, the British actually, sort of changed the landscape dramatically, because the British was very class conscious.
Very.
Had this class distinction, and this class distinction then led to a new voortrekkerbeweging starting at the Cape. Peter Retief and all them moved out because they were unhappy with the British rule and the way the British, look down on people.
What's that thing you always say? What the British used to say when they get to a foreign country?
If at first the locals don't understand you, you just speak louder until they do.
and a complete new history evolved, And then we had the Anglo-Boer War in the 1800s, again a negotiated settlement. But before that, there was the freeing of the slaves. And many farmers thought, and many people who owned slaves thought that these slaves were going to kill them. Again, there was no killing, and the slaves were really mistreated to a very large extent and abused because you belong to me and I can make with you whatever. And there was a lot of,
Dreadful stuff happened.
Yeah, and violent stuff like that. And then after the Anglo-Boer War, there was again a negotiated settlement, right? We had then 1994, or no, preceding 1994, negotiated settlement where people said, now we must create something new, constitutional democracy, with a Bill of Rights. Now, if you read that constitution, you will be blown away.
It's an incredible constitution.
And then again, 2024 came, and we again had the negotiated settlement. So Africa has been a country of and that saved us from imploding, to a very large extent. So the interesting thing is, if you look at our constitution, it's built on three solid building blocks. The one building block, and that's the work of the F.W. Clerk Foundation, to come back to F.W.'s role. So if it wasn't for him, we would have had bloodshed in our hands.
Yes.
And many people blame him. Yeah, he sold us out. And now you got black people saying that Mandela sold us out. Nobody sold anyone out. They negotiated a specific frame of constitutional framework. And if that framework would have been implemented properly, it would have been far down the line. Because it speaks about, the first one talks about human dignity. We come from a system that undermined human dignity. Human dignity is the premise on which we build everything in this country. If I'm a teacher and I don't recognize the human dignity of my pupils, and I come to school every second day, or I don't teach them properly, I undermine their human dignity, right? But it goes further. If I'm a teacher and I undermine their dignity by not teaching them properly and treating them well, it impacts on the second building block, which speaks to equality. In other words, and many people assume when we talk about equality, it's about all of us are equal in terms of intellect, equal in terms of material. That has nothing to do with that. Equality means I must make sure that I give those kids proper education so that they have access to equal opportunities. If they come out of that school, they can't read or write. They're all immediately at a disadvantage. There's no equality that I've sort of achieved by giving them second-hand, watered-down education, or no education at all. And then the third one is freedom. In other words, that poor kid will be trapped in a squatter camp. And I mean, to live in a squatter camp, I tell you, it's the antithesis of human dignity. Because where do you use a toilet? Where do you bath yourself? And then living in the squatter camp, there's no way that you can access the opportunity that we access. You will forever be dependent on street corners.
Yeah, the opportunity is there, but to get to that opportunity is just exponentially more difficult.
And then it undermines that freedom
Yes.
to choose. I mean, I've got proper education. I can, if I don't get a job here, I get on the aeroplane and I go work in London, wherever, all over the world, because, those 3 building blocks created the steps which I could then, ascend for a better opportunity in life. And unfortunately, with state capture, with people that have stolen the money of the country, people that don't care a damn, because the Bill of Rights says proper education, proper housing, proper this, proper that, proper that. I mean, there's no way that I will go to a public hospital in Gauteng or in any other province. You live there with half of your brain. That wasn't even the problem, So if we only, and I think we should thank FW de Klerk for the role that they've played to put our country on a path on a trajectory of hope and growth and so forth. Mm-hmm. And Mandela, who worked with him, Mandela has played a massive role to position South Africa internationally. Unfortunately, we've had leadership that completely failed the Constitution, failed the Bill of Rights. And during the Zuma years, and even when Cyril Ramaphosa took over, we've seen that he couldn't, turn his back for one moment because they were ready to take him out. But today, he's got the best opportunity to make sure that he empower that, and he demands from that government of national unity to take the country forward and hold them accountable. So the work of the F.W. de Klerk Foundation is to go into those spaces, unite communities, bring communities. I was here in Jamestown the other day.
Yes, I saw in your LinkedIn.
And it was so wonderful to see how colored, brown leaders, white leaders came together and said, like, how do we work together to benefit this community? I always say community do not need to be, paralyzed. Because you've got institutions, you've got schools, you've got, human capital, social capital. Use that to your advantage, but you need to coordinate, you need to, work together to unleash or leverage whatever sits there. So we will do a number of these projects throughout the country, also part of the national dialogue to get people talking, to say, like, how do we fix our community, as a people? And we need to break down those racial barriers and that mistrust that exists, because it's only through dialogue that we can change things for the better. Because what is the opposite of dialogue? Conflict. Conflict has never solved anything. We've seen the escalation of conflict all over the world, and it just leads to destruction and hatred and everything that goes with that. And unfortunately, you will never be able to destroy anyone in the process. The Jews or the Nazis tried to do that with the Jews, right? And the Jews just came out stronger on the other side. The same with the English tried to do that with the Afrikaners. They only came out stronger on this other side. Afrikaners did that to the black people, and they came strong on the other side. The problem is, that they say power corrupts, but the absolute power, completely corrupts. And that's what the GNU has now sort of mitigated, because absolute power that we've seen over the past 30 years has not really benefited the country. And I'm very excited and very hopeful about the future.
On that subject that we've just spoke, and I'm pretty sure you watched the rugby on Saturday with the Springboks and all the home games. If that national anthem starts to sing, I can't think of any prouder moment to be a South African. And if you look at the people in the stands, it's not what it used to be 20 years ago. If you looked at it 20 years ago, it was a white crowd. Now it is a South African crowd.
Precisely.
And my statement I want to make is that the general media is trying still to keep that. If you look at, yes, you posted on your LinkedIn about Jamestown, but there's many more of those things. Things that's got no involvement with any organized system pulling these things together. But those stories that are not being told, firstly, and the stories that's being told has got a narrative of creating it's you or me.
Yeah. No, and remember now, unfortunately, bad news sells.
Yes.
Yes.
Nobody, if you look at when Iran started to bombard Israel, that was the first on the news. Nobody said, tell the story about the Palestinian kid, the Jewish kid, and the Christian kid sitting around the table and break bread. And unfortunately, that's the world that we find ourselves in, and that's why, I was sort of very conflicted the past couple of months because I asked questions about why do we create, sort of outdated ideology? Why do we allow it to resurface around Afrikaans and Afrikaners, stuff like that? There was a lot of criticism and so forth. Nobody answered my question. Everyone attacked me. Everyone said, okay, if you don't know what this is, then we'll tell you what it is. Instead of saying, but, let us think with an open mind around this. Because it's about unity in diversity, right? How do we acknowledge each one is diverse, but how do we work towards a common goal? And also differentiate between, specific cultural interest and national interest. Right? Because national interest is about making sure everyone has something to eat tonight. Right? My personal interest is, right, where's the next sale? Do I have money in my pocket?
Yeah.
Let me have a bride and invite my friends. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But we need to make sure.
Apologies.
So yes, for me it's about, pushing an alternative narrative. Because remember now, what did we succeed, at the political level? We succeeded in creating a very, solid, constitutionally based, human rights based, non-racial power base in South Africa. When we created the GNU, there's white, there's black, there's brown, everyone there. What does the opposition seeks to do? Completely the opposite. They do not interested in the Constitution. They're not interested in creating a non-racial, society. It's all about the Africanist agenda. They call themselves the Progressive Caucus, so to speak. I mean, they are prepared to sacrifice everything, by playing popular politics. So, who is part of the Progressive Caucus? Very suspect people, compromised people, and impeach a judge. Right? Now you must understand the fine balancing act that we need to maintain in this country. And then on top of it, we sit with a very strong leader on this side, Cyril Ramaphosa, whose term is come to an end within the next 5 years. Who's going to replace him? Will that person have the same dedication, the same ability to keep this power base together? Because remember, if this power base fragments, and this is 70% of the country's vote that sits here, if it fragments, then we see the trouble. And it means there's 30% here that has an Africanist agenda, that has an agenda that, is completely, doesn't care about ethics and morals and so forth. Because a whole lot of the looters and the state capturers said, they take over. You must understand that we're going to enter we have entered the Renaissance now. Then we're going to enter the medieval age, and then we turn the clock backwards. So it's so critical that and besides of this, there's 11 million people that did not vote. Right? So the GNU must...
That's just the registered that didn't vote. That's not the rest of the country.
Yeah. So what will happen is that if that 11 million decides that they're going to shift their allegiance to the Progressive Caucus, and a lot of these people that sit here also shift over here because it just needs a charismatic leader. Just needs a caliber on this side.
Yeah.
And it just needs a weak leader on this side. Then you have trouble. It all boils down to political leadership. So Cyril's work is cut out for him, but more so making sure that he has the ANC under his control. Because there are elements that would rather shift to this side than to this side. So we have a typical two-state, almost political environment, or not two-state, more a two power-based, twin power-based setup in the country. And that's why, for me, it's important that politicians that are part of the GNU should work towards greater unity, towards collaboration. It's no use to want to threat. All you do with your threat is to undermine the prestige and at the end of the day to cause even greater division and mistrust, which will not benefit you, will benefit the other side.
Sure.
Wow. Christo, looking down the road into the future, what do you see for yourself?
Yeah, my work obviously is to assist communities, to bring communities together, because many communities, think that democracy comes once in 5 years. When I voted, then I now can sit back because the politicians that I voted in power will do the work for me. I said, no. Democracy is about active participation on a daily basis. Stop dreaming about unfulfilled promises and forget about it. As a community, yes, you've got your people that you've elected into power, but the best way you can hold them accountable is to become active participants.
Yeah, show them up.
Yeah, and be involved in your IDP process, integrated development process at municipal level. Be involved in the school governing body. Be involved in the buurtwag. Be involved in all kinds of facets in your community.
I'm worried they're going to fire me because I'm going to offend people when I join these things.
But, it's for me, it's about co-ownership. Take co-ownership of democracy. That's the message that I get out there. So that in short is what I
Thank
would
you.
like to do.
That we have a closing tradition, and that is to ask somebody. So our last question is a question sent to us by somebody else. They don't know who the next person is that they're going to ask, and it's just a random question. Do you want me to choose, or are you going to choose one of these? We got somebody that sent us several questions, and they are actually all quite good. And it's interesting because everyone has their own. There's only one. The only answer is your answer. There isn't a right or a wrong one.
There's a couple that you've already answered, actually.
That's why I'm giving it to you, because you've kind of touched on many of them.
Okay, there's one that we have used previously, but I think it could work well for you. Is which crisis or crises in your career was the best learning experience?
I think the biggest crisis that I've faced, and now you refer to personal crises, or
It's anything.
You choose.
yeah.
However you define it.
Yeah, I think when the biggest crisis that I faced in my working career was the uprisings in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng 2-3 years ago.
2021.
And because the entire N3 was blocked. And the N3 is the main artery in terms of bringing stuff from Durban Harbour into Gauteng, and from there it's been distributed. Secondly, it's also the main artery into KZN. And thirdly, many of the farmers were targeted. And that was a big worry for me at that point in time. And the first thing that we did was to say, right, let's get our ground structures activated. And it was even not necessary because those people, stood together. They started patrolling those farms. They started to make sure that they protect their homesteads and their factories and so forth. And we then immediately went out to get financial support for those structures because if you want to make sure that everything is safe, then you must have the necessary equipment to do so. And secondly, the big issue was then engaging with government on this. We had a meeting with the president. Said, Mr. Van Rheede, what can we? I said, Mr. President, safeguard your N3. Make sure that the trucks are protected. Make sure that those people that are destroying, that they are held, that they are held accountable for their deeds, being in the army. But you could see we were on the verge. People don't realize we were on the verge of a coup.
Yes, it came out afterwards.
There was a very, very, serious dereliction of duty by the Minister of
Police?
No, Minister of the Army.
Oh, yeah.
Defense.
Yeah, of Defense. Okay. She's also the one that's now in serious trouble for serious corruption charges. Because they moved her to become Speaker, and from there it was exposed that she is seriously compromised. In other words, she's part of this Progressive Caucus camp. And you can just, look at the way she and her husband are now both actually part of this camp. And how that camp at that point in time actually wanted to take over the power in the country. By first and foremost, not activating the army. By secondly, paralyzing the economy. And they've hoped that the entire country would rise. That was the strategy. Unfortunately and luckily it didn't happen.
Yeah, because that was quite a thing.
It was a scary time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for answering that. And thank you very, very much for taking time to come and see us at reasonably short notice.
Yeah.
And it's been an incredibly interesting conversation. And good luck with all the things that you're doing, and thank goodness for people like you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Now I need to go and feast.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.